question.
Yeah.
If you weren't making money like you were, and you were just working some regular job in Nebraska, and you thought it somewhat lucrative for you to do, would you ever consider doing sex work?
Or am I like making a ton of assumptions here, or
Well,
like
what
that I could make
assumptions are you
money off of it, that people would want to buy
Yes,
it from me?
like you had the inclination that you could make, like, middle of the rock. I'm not even be top 1%, but let's say you can make 6 grand, six figures.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Hell yeah, I'd do it.
You would? Okay. There's no reservation beyond like the money aspect for you?
No, but I feel like I clear a lot of the hurdles that like people worried about. Like, I'm not part of a community that would be judgmental for it. I'm not like super close to my family. I don't think they would disown me. And even if they did, it's like, I think those are the two big ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any reservations in regards to the idea of just having your sexual experiences online?
No, I don't give a fuck.
You don't care about that at all? Okay. And hypothetically, let's say your child, son or daughter, wants to do it. Do you feel similarly like that? You'd be incredibly supportive?
I mean,
let's say
I'd hope they could do more with their life than that, but
yeah, let's say they didn't have any financial issues because you're willing to provide for a lot of stuff, and they're willing to accept the money. Like, they just want to do it. Would you be supportive of them doing so?
I mean, if that was literally like their best course of action, if nothing else would happen. But I mean, I'd hope they could like go to college and get a job and be like a engineer or something, or do something more than that. That'd be my hope, right?
When you say more than that, what does that mean? You don't feel like sex work is real work? Sorry,
I mean, it's like a lowest common. I have a thing that I can't clear to my throat. It's gonna drive me crazy. I'm gonna sound raspy for a bit. I mean, there's like a bucket of things that everybody can kind of do, and then as you become more educated and more specialized, you get into contributions where like only you can do these things. And I feel like for at least for my child, I would want him to become like as specialized or move into that direction as much as possible, such that you're offering like a unique skill set or a unique contribution to the world. I feel like sex work is kind of on the lower rung of things you can offer to the world.
Okay, but I feel like most people are not offering like a really unique skill set. Am I crazy in saying that?
Yeah, most people aren't. I wouldn't want my kid to be like an electrician or a carpenter either. I'd hope he could do something more. But yeah.
Okay, so for you, your kid being like a trade worker is like unbecoming or like not good.
I don't think it's like unbecoming. I'm just saying I think you hope that your children could like accomplish more or aspire to more. I mean, that would be my hope. But I mean, like whatever ends up working. I mean, people can find happiness in a lot of different ways. But yeah, it just depends. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that there's a normie and they could do well on OnlyFans. You'd be supportive of that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What would be any reservations you'd have beyond the career path? Is there something that would make you like, nah, I don't think I'd want this for my child?
I mean, as long as they're not like breaking any laws, and as long as they feel like they're respecting themselves and they're not compromising their personal integrity or health and safety for a particular thing, I'd probably be roughly supportive.
Okay. Very fair. And I guess the last question I had. When people have reservations in regards to sex work, what are some of the things that you've seen that people are not okay with? Obviously, like there's a lot of social stigma, shame, but like what are some things that you've seen? Good or bad arguments?
Good or bad arguments? In terms of like why not to do it?
Yeah.
I mean, bad arguments are going to be anyone that I think like presupposes some moral feeling, because it's obviously if somebody disagrees with you, you're not going to convince them on the sex topic thing, right? Like arguing with people that it's immoral if the person's not like religious or doesn't share your faith is going to be a waste of time. So those are dog shit arguments, I think.
What about feelings?
What about feelings?
I feel like a lot of people have weird feelings when it comes to sex work that aren't necessarily related to inherently shame, but just their views on intimacy and whether or not it should be private and whatnot.
I think that if you want to go into sex work, I think what you need to do is the person needs to be willing to grapple with the realities of what it means to people and people on camera, because I feel like a lot of people don't grasp those two realities very well. Like sex is a pretty intimate thing. It's a pretty unique experience. It involves like a high level of vulnerability and trust with another person in an unprecedented hormonal state. And you need to be willing to grasp with that first before you make any decisions past that. And to pretend like it's not that, you're probably setting yourself up for massive disappointment or failure.
So when you say it's intimate, it's because you're being vulnerable and because it's such a like visceral reaction to it, both like emotionally and physically.
Yeah, for sure.
Fair. Yeah. Okay. I'm inclined to agree with that.
Yeah. I think that there are people that, I think that a lot of people have jumped into a lot of like casual sex environments and stuff thinking it's no big deal. And then they end up getting burned because it kind of is a big deal. I mean, sexual engagement with people is it is a unique thing. It's a very unique thing. And there's a lot of unique stuff that goes along with it. The hormonal states, the vulnerability, the trust, like there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And people treat it, I think, too much with kid gloves sometimes. But I mean, like, that's just a reaction and a response to the, retarded religious people that say that sex is the holiest act in the world and you pair bond with one person for your entire life and anything outside of that is degenerate and horrible and bad for you and blah, 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 blah. So the sexual quote unquote revolution or rebellion we see right now is a response to the over stringent conservative standards in the past. Hopefully we wind it back a little bit and settle out into some realistic world where people can have healthy and good conversations about what it means to sexually engage with people and have casual sex partners so that people can figure out if it's good for them or not. I find too many people choose one or the other as a response to people that they don't like in their life, and then they end up regretting it later on. I've known people that have jumped into casual sex and have felt like really gross and used and unhappy with it after a couple years of trying it. And I've known people that, take way too long to get into casual sex because they felt shame about having more than like one partner when they were 27. So yeah, people just have a really hard time honestly engaging with the topic because I think a lot of people don't actually care about sex. They care about like all of the moral loading and everything that goes into it way more than the act itself. Like a religious person doesn't give a fuck about sex as much as they do about like the moral arguments in the family building and blah, 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 blah. And then like a, third wave feminist or all these really far left woke people don't care about sex. They just like the freedom of women to fuck whoever they want with no consequences and blah, 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 blah. So it's like, I just feel like it's so dumb. There's no good conversations about it, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think on this point we probably agree. I think a lot of people who treat sex flippantly aren't actually engaging with the fact that it's affecting them a lot of times. Like, I know some people who don't generally get affected by it. My experience with most people is that generally over time of having sex, relationships, hormones, all these things get involved, and the dynamic between two people just changes as a result of it. So it can be this flippant thing that has real no meaning, and at the same time is deepening your relationship with somebody over time. I feel like those two things are kind of counterintuitive. And like you said, it is vulnerable. At the end of the day, you're doing something in front of somebody that you generally wouldn't do in front of most people. Obviously, for people who do stuff online, it's a bit different. But yeah, I just think it has a lot more implications than a lot of people want to admit.
And then I wish people... Go on.
And I was just saying, like, I think when I was asked recently, like, okay, well, why is it something that you keep private? And as I was thinking about the answer, I was like, it is very much what you said. It feels vulnerable. It feels like, oh, I'm doing this thing with you that I don't do with anyone else. And so for that reason alone, that's why I prefer to keep it a private thing. But yeah.
Yeah.
You were going to say?
Where did that question get asked from? I feel like I saw that happen.
No, you didn't see it happen to me, but I got asked privately.
Oh, why do I feel like I was watching something where somebody mentioned something about sex not being a big deal or something, and then somebody said like, "Oh, well then why do you keep that private? Why don't you just show everybody then or something?" Well,
it might be Lav. Lav might have said something like that.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I wish I could remember where I saw this. I don't know if it was on stream or off stream. But yeah, I wish that like one thing that would be interesting is if we had better conversations about maybe it was Lab to Kelly Jean. Oh, maybe it was. I feel like if people had better conversations about this, I think you could have like better rampings like up and down to different things as well. That would be interesting to help people explore if it was right for them. So for instance, like if sex work, like if we had honest conversations about what was involved in sex work, I bet you could have better conversations about trying to figure out if it was okay for somebody to do it or not do it. Like there are ways to ramp up and down to like full on getting boy girl content on Pornhub that aren't just like, well, try it and see how it goes, like maybe, thank you. I love you. Like maybe that involves like taking sexy pictures of just like parts of your body without your face being included, posting it under a different name. And then you can get like feedback of like, well, somebody's saying something mean about you. How does it make you feel? Like there's probably ways to like ramp up and down on some of these things to figure out how you feel rather than people just being so ideologically dug in that they're either saying like go full and do it or do nothing because it's evil. But we never really have any of those conversations because everybody's like moralizes the out of it so much. So
yeah, I think one of the interesting things about having spoken to sex workers in private is just because there's so much taboo surrounding the topic, there's actually no real good like information out there about what it really entails. One thing that really shocked me is that a vast majority of it is incredibly emotional for the Johns or the people who are paying for these services. I had a stripper tell me that when she does private dances, like when they do like the 1 hour sessions, like they spend a lot of it just talking. I was like, imagine paying $1,000 an hour because you saw some girl rolling up and down on some pole, and then you get behind the curtain, and then you really just want to speak to them and talk to them. And I was looking at Amaranth's sales for how much she made. I think it was something crazy like $57 million in 3-4 years, and the majority of her services that where she made most of the income was from messaging.
Although it's hard to know like what the messaging is because we don't really know.
Yes, it might be like, oh, you want to see my bathwater or whatever. But the fact that it's even a substantial portion of it is actually really interesting. And a lot of sex workers have told me like a lot of people are just looking for an emotional thing. Like even people who escort, yes, generally sex is part of the trade-off, but they do spend a considerable amount of time forming an emotional connection with these people. And I think that's why a lot of these Twitch streamers who are like booby streamers or whatever are so successful, is they spend a lot of time. Yes, they might hook the people in with sex per se, but the emotional connection that they start building with these women from seeing them so often and fantasizing about them and then interacting with them is really what keeps them in emotionally. And I think that's what drives the sales to go up. Because if it was just a sex thing, then the most desirable, physically attractive woman would always be getting the most amount of money, but that's just not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. It's also important that like different people engage with different sex workers in different ways. What a worthless statement. Based on like what type of sex worker and what environment we're talking about. So for what you're saying, when it comes to like escorting and stuff, I've heard that a lot, that a lot of women that do escort, the emotional or like GFE, whatever for an escort is really, 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 really important. I've heard from some dancers that some men like to talk or they like to feel close and you hang out, but in that environment, it's going to be a bit more sexual. And then for OnlyFans, depending on the type of content you sell, it's going to be way different. Or like a Pornhub subscriber is just looking at your porn videos. They're not like messaging at all. It just kind of depends. But yeah, people, even labeling it just like sex work, it's more than that and less than that at the same time sometimes, depending on what level you're talking. Because yeah,
I wonder
what.
Well, if I spend all my time, like, yes, there's definitely, I think what you said is true in regards to like certain forms of sex work will involve more sex than not. But just the fact that it's a substantial part of a lot of the industry tells me that what a lot of these Johns are looking for, sometimes it's sexual fulfillment, sometimes it's like the fulfillment of fantasy. But they essentially, like, there's a huge element of desire in being seen by the opposite sex that goes well beyond sex. That is pretty like evident all forms of sex work. And that, like, for example, when they're throwing money at the person, yes, it's for their sexual gratification, but it's also a thing of like, I want to be recognized by this woman and I want her services as a result. And I feel like the emotion really is the underlying factor beneath most of the sex. Do you agree or disagree? I'm not even saying they're lonely per se. That's not exactly what I'm getting at. I'm saying there's a sense of emotional fulfillment that they need from these experiences for it to really matter.
I think it probably depends on, it just depends on what you're looking at or how they're engaging it. Like if you subscribe to some girls' OnlyFans, probably not. But if you're paying to like DM them, probably. If you're paying for an escort, for sure. If you're throwing money at a stripper because you want to see her do like a trick or something, or you just want to lap dance, that may be one thing. But if you're throwing money at her because you know that she'll come around and talk with you while you share drinks, then maybe, yeah. I think the emotional part is probably, I just don't talk to a lot of sex work consumers, so it's hard to say. But I'm sure the emotional component is a lot of it for some people, yeah.
You don't feel like he's like that for OnlyFans? I feel like for OnlyFans, one of the places where I feel like it's the most like that. Am I crazy?
The problem with OnlyFans is nobody actually knows like what any of the numbers are on anything, and people just like assume whatever the they want to make whatever argument they want. So when you're talking to people that are highly critical, for instance, Gisticle is a really good example in my chat. These people will say that OnlyFans is a platform where 99% of the people that are engaged in it are trying to make the girls their girlfriends because they're obsessed and they have no other person to talk to in their life, and the women are all like being abusive and exploitative of these poor men that are lonely and vulnerable and seeking relationships and blah, blah, blah. The reality is I don't know like what the delineation is on people that engage with like the percentage of people that engage in OnlyFans for like the girlfriend experience versus just like subscribing or DMing to get off. And I don't know of the people that engage in it for the...
Literally everything he just said is a straw man and not true. Anyway.
It's bye. Everything I just said was true. And he was spamming it in chat so much when I was debating Airdead on it. But yeah, he just derailed me, but yeah.
You were saying the delineation between the percentages of people who want an emotional connection, which
versus people that are just like looking to get off. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say, but it does seem to be a substantial portion. I think on that we can both agree.
No, I don't know.
You don't know.
No.
In general,
like a study could come out tomorrow that says that like 5% of the people there are like looking for that big emotional connection on OnlyFans, and I'd be like, okay, it makes sense. Or a study came out saying like 65% of people are looking for it.
No.
Oh, okay, maybe.
Not OnlyFans. I'm talking about sex work in general.
Well, sex work in general includes OnlyFans. And we're saying like any real life event, especially for escorts or whatever, it seems like that connection is pretty important. For escorting, it's particular escorting, it seems like it. I don't know if it's the same for like, what are they called? Rub and tugs? Like if you go to like those places, like are those people looking for emotional intimacy? Probably not, right? Or do you think they are? Or
I don't know how it works at rub and tugs. So I mean, I could just go.
Like you just go in, you get jerked off, and then you leave in like an hour or whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, with the Asian ladies, I wonder. That's a good question. Probably not. It would seem so, but I don't know. I've never spoken to people who are customers, and I've never spoken to people who are providing the services. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason why I say that is because I had one vision of escorting before, and then once I learned more about it from escorts, I realized like, oh, everything I thought I knew about it is completely wrong. So it could be the same for rub and tugs.
Yeah. Do you enjoy having sex? Is it like a fun experience for you?
That's a good question. So I had to think about that over time.
Damn, really? Why? Walk me through your thought process.
Because there's a difference between the compulsion to have sex and accomplishing that in actual pleasure per se.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like I've always had the compulsion for it. Like I've always.
Well, when
like
you're having sex, is it like a fun? There's like a fun, cool, like, oh, I like this. I want to do this again.
I think the compulsion is probably really stronger than the gratification. I think there have been times in my life where I've had very gratifying sex, but as I've gotten older, I think like generally that's been more linked to who I was having it with and my relationship with them more so than the act itself. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Do you? Why do you ever masturbate?
Boredom.
That's it. It doesn't like feel good. You're not like, oh, this is like fun.
It's boredom, bro. Like I'm not gonna lie to you. It's a compulsion. It's boredom. It's like a little dopamine rush. I don't really think that's pleasure. That to me is not like. I guess you could define that as pleasure, but I'm gonna be honest with you. Like I notice this. I don't masturbate unless I got a lot of free time, and if I don't have free time, I don't even think about masturbating at all. So how much can I really enjoy it if it's just a time filler? That's like watching an anime and seeing like those shitty filler episodes and thinking like, oh yeah, this is great. Like no, it's not great. You're just watching it because it's part of the next episode. But do I enjoy it? No, I don't think so.
Do you think
And I wager that's probably true for most people. Like every time I meet someone, they're like, "Oh fuck, bro, I'm addicted to porn." I'm like, "No, bitch, you got too much free time." I guarantee you, when you take a camping trip, you don't even think about fucking porn at all. You don't have a porn addiction. You just got too much free time. And when you have free time, you don't like being alone with your own thoughts or being quiet. So you just look for a dopamine rush. So some people, it's like they play a long podcast. Because they just hate silence and then they're just doing other things. Some people it's like they read a book and they do something else, and then other people is masturbation. But you're not addicted. You got too much free time.
Gotcha. And I'm just curious. So for like a relationship, what do you think is like an ideal amount of sex?
For me, I would say maybe like 2-3 times a week. I'm probably good with that. Like, especially once I've settled into the relationship over some time, then yeah.
That feels like kind of a lot if you're kind of indifferent to it. Or is it just like an emotional relationship bonding thing for you?
I like physical proximity, so I'm always liking to be close to my partner. I like touching, like not all the time, but like if we're going to be close, I like to be close. And generally, once I get to that state, I just get horny. And then, I don't know, I'm like, well, the compulsion's there, and I love this person, so why not? But I'm somebody who likes physical touch, so because I like that, I think it just naturally leads to a lot of sex as a result.
Do you feel do you enjoy dancing?
Oh yeah. Dancing is like completely different though.
What do you mean by that?
It's like
let's say that I just do a big rant at you. When you go camping, motherfucker, you're not thinking about dancing. You're just dancing for a dopamine rush because you're bored. What would your counter be to that? Yeah.
I am. I'm thinking about it all the time. Like when I travel, I literally look up dance spots in whatever city I'm going to, so I can go out dancing. I'm constantly making it part of my life anywhere. Like even right now, I'm going to be traveling to Asia for a little bit, and I'm looking at cities that have a lot of dancing. For me, it's like completely different. And this is what it's akin to. And I know everyone can understand this if they do it, but like if you work out, you have a really good workout, you come out of it steamed out, all physically exhausted, you feel cleansed, you feel amazing. That's how I feel when I leave a dance event. So yeah, it's different. And I know people when they travel, they still like to work out because they need that experience. That's not the same to me as masturbation. I think you probably have the same experience maybe with streaming. I don't know. Or maybe like a really good debate.
You think so?
Because I know when you travel, you like to make that shit part of your schedule. So if you're traveling, you like to travel for work. For you, it's like a compulsion, but it's also something I think you thoroughly enjoy to have like meaningful debates.
Okay.
Do you see the difference between that?
Versus the meaningful debates versus like sex, or
Well, I don't know what your relationship with sex is, but like maybe masturbation would probably example. Like, do you find masturbation super gratifying?
hell yeah.
Interesting. Go on.
What do you mean? It's a good time.
It's a good time. Well, obviously we're talking about different forms of pleasure, right? There's like the difference between like having a burger you're indifferent about, having a really nice meal that's completely great. Like food is food, but not all sex is the same sex. You know what I'm saying? Like you can go to a spot where you eat at and it's just you're indifferent about it, and you can have like an amazing restaurant experience. So I'm asking you, is there any tiers to sex or sexual experiences for you?
Yeah, of course. But I think I don't think you're lying, right? I think people have just like different experiences. I'm not saying that like my view is better than yours or whatever, but
Yeah, I want to know your view. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know. I really like sex. It's just like really fun to me. Sometimes there's like a girl I know that lives. I finally know a girl in Florida, but she lives like an hour and a half away. But if I got nothing else going on at night, if I've done all my shit, I'm just like, fuck it, I'll drive over and spend the night, for a few hours. I don't know. It's super fun for me. But I kind of grew up assuming that everybody was like that. But now I'm seeing, especially after going through the red pill arc, that people have way different views on how much they engage sex for sex sake versus like the other peripheral things around it. Which is interesting, I think. Yeah.
I'm curious for you, are there any forms of pleasure that you'd rank above sex?
Yeah, one thing. Yeah, I obviously I super love music. I am very much like improvisational when it comes to music, and if I can find somebody else that can like jam with me on that, like give a set of chords and just like play for 30 minutes or whatever, that type of, if you're really connected to the person you're playing with, that is a very, very, very nice experience for me. I don't know if the best sex is better than like the best like musical session with somebody, but those two things are pretty similar, I think. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting though. Like, what makes the best sex? And I'm curious about this. Is the after effect of it, like, or your afterthoughts of it, important? Is it just how it feels in the moment? I'm curious for you, what makes the best sex the best sex? And let me just preface it by saying, I've had times where like the body parts just fit. Like for whatever reason, I was very excited physically, and everything was working well. Busted a bunch of times. It was very easy, seamless. But after the fact, I didn't feel amazing about it because I really was like, I don't really care about this part, whatever. Maybe that is considered quote unquote like technically the best sex, but for me, it wasn't like a very great experience in that I did away from it thinking like, wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of like peripheral things that can make sex good. Like maybe you're really attracted to the person. Maybe the inside of their vagina just feels really good. Their mouth is the right size or some bullshit. Like there's a lot of stuff like that. Yeah. I think the best sexual partners, it's hard to explain when I say this. I think you either know or you don't know, and then it's hard to understand otherwise. But the best types of people to be physical with, this includes cuddling as well, is some people kind of just like do what's in front of them, and other people are very intentional with the way that they move. And people that are intentional with the way that they move, those experiences are always like a billion times better than people that just kind of like do what's in front of them. Like it's a difference between like you go to have sex and your bodies are there, and then the person like grabs your dick and they just like kind of stroke it for like 20 minutes, or they just like get on you and they move for like 20 minutes, and there's like not very much thought going into what's happening. There's not very much intention in how they're moving or their actions or the impact on you. I think it takes a relatively high degree of empathy. It takes a good degree of like self-control. It takes a good degree of like physical adeptness. Like you have to be able to manipulate and move parts and everything. But I think that the intentionality aspect with the way that a person moves their body, I think is for me what makes it like the best type of sexual experience. It's just in terms of like a pleasure level. Yeah.
Let me ask you then, if you just had a one night stand, for example, and it was that physical experience, do you think you'd rank that higher than with somebody who you had that experience with consistently? I don't think you would. I think generally part of what makes it the best is like the consistency aspect of it, the kind of trust that you have with that person, all these other like different emotional factors that are not necessarily inherently physical.
It's hard to disaggregate because all of my long-term partners are doing that thing that I really enjoy, that intentional aspect. So like let's say that I was dating somebody that I had really, really bad sex with because we just didn't click, or I felt like they weren't intentional, they didn't learn anything or whatever, after a year, and then I had a one night stand with somebody who was really amazing because they were very intentional, very empathetic. I think I would rate that one night stand higher. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But like, but I'm probably not going to date a person long term that we just don't click with sexual. Like sexual chemistry and romantic chemistry are like two of the most important things I have when ranking like partners in terms of thinking of like, could I date this person or not?
Gotcha. And considering all this, when you think about all that, you feel like that's equal to you jamming out with somebody and making some good music?
It's not equal, but it's like there's a lot. I guess no, I've never really thought about comparing those two things before. But there's a lot of like crossover in terms of like if you're improving, it requires you to be adept at the form of whatever you're talking in, right? Like when you and Melina were dancing through like steps, like there's a particular pattern or rhythm that you have to understand. And when you're engaged in that pattern or rhythm, you have to be able to do it with another person there. So you have to be in time with each other. There's like a vocabulary back and forth that you're able to speak to one another in music. There's going to be like some creating space for the other person, taking space for yourself when necessary. So I guess in some ways, I guess it's pretty comparable. Or maybe I'm generalizing it so much that all forms of like art or sports or dance or whatever are like this. But yeah, I guess it's pretty
no, you describe dance pretty well. That is very similar to what it feels like when
sure. I mean, dance and music are going to be very similar because they both occur usually with music. Obviously, music and dance obviously does, and then in time. And then I know you can do like freestyle improv dance. You can do like more rigid set dance. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, all that stuff is true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I just want to bring this stuff up to you, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Somebody said you just made a video on this. What were your strong feelings on this?
On sex, no. I think we covered. There's a parent, basically like a father and a daughter, who run a short form podcast on TikTok. And the daughter told the dad that she wanted to start up an OnlyFans. And they had a conversation on camera. It was actually pretty interesting to watch, and a lot of people felt some way about the parenting style. People were really against it. Other folks are really for it. I think it might be interesting for you to watch. It's only like 6 minutes, so it's not too long. But yeah, it was. We just talked about that. So
interesting. That type of interaction that you're talking about. That's the reason why I'm known as the incest guy. I don't know if you ever saw the original video, but I think it was like 8 years ago or something. We read a post on Reddit where like a mom and a dad were very open with their daughter sexually in terms of like they could answer any questions and they helped the daughter, blah, blah, blah. And I think at some point the daughter asked like, oh, would you guys buy a sex toy for me so I don't have to like masturbate with my hairbrush? And they're like, well, sure, we're sexually positive. Why not? And they did it. And then I think at some point the daughter asked the dad and mom if they could show her how to use it. And then I think the dad was the one that posted on Reddit is like, is this like appropriate? Or this feels like we're crossing a line, or I don't know how to say no because our daughter says that it shouldn't be a big deal because we're open and we're not like actually fucking each other. And I thought that conversation was really, really, really interesting. And then after that, people were like, oh, you think dad should fuck their daughter? They're like, okay. But yeah, it was the same type of thing that set it off. Yeah.
Hey, listen, when it comes to daughters, fathers, and all things related to sex work, it turns into brain noir like super fast. It's like, it makes me think of like the pedos and kids conversations, immediate brain rot, instantly. So yeah, you being called a incest guy makes perfect sense.
Based, yeah.